Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is July 18th, and quick topic here, and that is why Estonian women typically prefer dating their own men. This is a topic that many people aren't too familiar with. Firstly, in most of the Eastern European countries, it's very optimal if you're a foreign guy for dating, and there's many opportunities. Even if we go across to Russia, to Latvia, there's definitely a fair amount of women that like to date the foreign guys and sometimes even marry. Now, Estonia actually is an exception to this, and I'm one that's traveled through most of the Eastern European countries and have both my own experiences and I've gotten accounts from people close to me. I've came to the realization that Estonia is simply not a great place for dating if you're a foreign guy. The women prefer dating their own guys and marrying them, which is fine. There's no problem with this. This is a part of life. This is not anything that I condone or that I frown upon. But it's important for foreign guys to realize this, because often there may be this misconception or stereotype that they love dating foreign guys, which actually isn't often the case. But the question is, why is this? Because many guys look at these cluster of Eastern European countries and don't understand that sometimes there's exceptions, and often the exceptions come from the smaller, the more out there countries. The first thing I'll hit at here is that Estonia is a small country. That also means that the spectrum of personality is also more narrow. And there's just simply not the abundance of personality types. And if there are, most of these people are probably already in a relationship, which is typically it's longer term in this country. There's not a lot of breaking of relationships quickly like we see in other Western countries like the US and Canada. This is just the case here. So if you're a foreign guy, come along and you're Mr. Hotshot, most likely that's not going to be enough to sway a girl. Yeah, maybe if you're like David Beckham or Lionel Messi or something, that they may make an exception there, but most guys aren't in that position. That's what it is. So spectrum is huge here. Now the next thing is the closeness of family. While many people here aren't necessarily close to immediate family, they definitely spend a fair amount of time with them in most cases. In this situation, I'll also mention that I'm referring to both Estonian and Russian-speaking Estonians, because often the Russian and Estonian-speaking Estonians, they classify themselves separately. They don't put themselves in the same category, but they're actually in some ways similar, in other ways not so much. But in this case, it's everyone. It's important to understand how, if one's raising children, it's much easier often to a family nearby to give one a hand with helping to raise the kids and to be there, or having a brother or sister that can assist, and or for moral support, to have someone nearby to talk to. When we look at most foreign guys, myself included, we don't have any immediate family nearby. It's actually very far away, and this is a huge downside. It automatically means that one side's going to be kind of cut off in a sense, and this is definitely the case here. The next reason here is, when we look at Estonia as a country, it's economically progressed quite a bit in the past 20 to 25 years from the former Soviet period. It's incredible how much it's progressed and changed. And likewise, as you would expect, it's affected family dynamics, social dynamics between genders quite a bit. And it also has produced a new, younger, wealthier class of people. There's many men out here that are financially very well off. The women here, it's often very easy to access these guys, or the guys who access them. They can find them. When you live in small countries like this, it's not that hard to find the wealthiest people and to even meet them face to face. I've met the founder of a very famous taxi sharing company here, a multi-billion-dollar company. I've also personally met the prime minister in this country. So it's very easy. And just to know, I never met a president in America. I've seen a president in person when I was younger, never met a president, and I don't think I've ever met a billionaire in person, or even someone with 9-figure net worth in person in America. So this just kind of just showcases how much easier it is to access these kind of people. And likewise, those women are going to be very interested often in dating and possibly marrying those kind of guys. They're not really going to feel an economic need for a foreign guy, because when you look at Estonia as the Eastern European country, it's not like in the same situation as countries like Russia and Ukraine. I am not saying economics is the only thing in this situation. I'm saying it's a factor here. It's a important factor. Next reason here is simply the comfort of being with someone from your own country, from your own society. When I think of my parents, they grew up in their early years in the 1970s in America. It was very different in America at this time. And they both grew up in a smaller city in America called St. Louis. St. Louis is much smaller than Chicago. In some ways, you could almost look at it, the difference between St. Petersburg, Russia, to Tallinn. St. Louis kind of has this same, when we look at size, comparison to Chicago. Chicago is a much larger city, much more renowned. St. Louis is more of, it's always been seen as a flyover city. It's actually had kind of a social reputation for various reasons, but very nice people nonetheless. When my parents were growing up, they were both in high school during the 1970s. In my mother's high school, most of her fellow classmates in her graduating class, they married other people from St. Louis. Many of them just stayed in St. Louis, and many of them didn't even marry someone from outside, from a different city in the country, and definitely not someone from a different country. This was, I mean, very uncommon at this time, especially in these smaller flyover cities in America. People generally just stay with their own. It was more comfortable. It just, when people have this more smaller village feel, it often just it's more in their comfort zone, and it's easier. They don't feel any social stigma or anything. And this is often the case in places similar. Estonia is definitely the situation. There hasn't been a lot of proliferation of foreign relationships here. When we look at a country like Russia, the president of Russia, his daughter used to have married to a foreign man. He was from Netherlands, and this just showcases Russia. This is the highest person in power, and this was actually a family member of his. Whereas in Estonia, yes, most people, it's just more comfortable. They stay with someone from their own city, or they're the same country. They can speak the same language. It's actually even common for the Estonian-speaking Estonians to stay with their fellow Estonian-speaking people, and the Russian-speaking Estonians to stay with Russian-speaking people. That is changing, though, at the moment. There is definitely more cross happening, but that's how it used to be. This next area is one that is really close to me because I come from a large empire kind of country, America. People that grow up in these larger empire countries with very large, diverse groups of people, we look at places like China, India, Russia, US. We're used to growing up around very different kinds of people. At birth, through your early years, it's just what you're used to. I grew up in Chicago, and this was second nature to me. This wasn't anything uncommon. And I think it's often the same way for people growing up in Moscow, Russia, and St. Petersburg, very diverse cities, and these countries as a whole. They're used to being around all these different groups, ethnic groups within the same country, and I think it just changes perception a lot. It's probably the same way that it also changes perception of people living in smaller countries with very homogeneous populations like Estonia. Yes, there are foreign groups that live here, and there's always been foreign groups that have been here. But when you look at the whole of the population, and it's a small population, most of the people are pretty similar. There's not a lot of different ethnic groups that have been here for centuries like we see in places like Russia or China. This is definitely becomes kind of wired into someone's, it's more sublime nature and how they perceive other cultures, and they're just more familiar. It's just more of something they're used to, and I think this is the case that Estonians just aren't really like it's not really wired into their nature at a young age, whereas if we look at Russia, it's very wired in. It's probably one of the reasons that Russian women are very open to dating and even marrying foreign guys. Okay, next reason is the fact that most women, by certain nature, are already in relationships. Most girls, older girls, are already in relationships here. They are not single. And often if they're single, these women want to remain that way. Often these women don't even want to have any informal relationship of any sort. This is actually, I think, becoming more and more common in this country. This is just, I think, becoming common also in other places. Because of this, there's not a lot of women on the market. It's a very small float or rotation of females. And often if a guy does happen to land a relationship, it's often through kind of a random or chance occurrence. There's just not a lot available. And this is not like other places where the rotation size just tends to be a lot larger. When we look at the fact that it's a small country, of course, and the fact that they're just already in long-term relationships or partnerships, and then the ones that are single are probably single for a reason, and this is probably becoming more common also in this country. When you look at Russia, there's probably a larger rotation of women that are available and that are dateable. Next reason is the fact that once Estonia became free, once it was liberated from the Soviet Union, there was a large proliferation of men that came into all of the Eastern European countries, and Estonia was targeted pretty heavily. And when you think about the size of Estonia and just there weren't a lot of women and stuff, and at that time there was a lot of more opportunities for the average guy. Keep in mind, we didn't have dating apps, we didn't have social media, none of these outlets existed. Women didn't get nearly as much free attention like they do now. And keep in mind, a lot of them were not leaving the country. They were unable to travel abroad or to live abroad. Just a lot more limited opportunities in their encounters with foreign guys. Now, a lot of the foreign guys that came to countries like this weren't very good quality guys, and they were often here for more fun than formal reasons, and it left kind of a bad impression on a lot of the females at that time, I believe. This is more due to discussion and input that I've received from older men that were Estonian or foreign men that have lived here for many years, that came here during that time. When we think of the age of what those women would have been, now many of those same women have kids or daughters that are the same age as girls that I would date. Or maybe they have cousins or they have nieces. And this had definitely left a kind of a bad taste in their mouth from that era. And it probably inclined more women just to stay with their own guys, to date and marry, because they just saw that they were probably going to be there in the long term and were just maybe better quality. So that left a long-term impact here. Next reason here is due to the fact that many women can now leave Estonia and they can travel, they can study and work. As stated before, the economy's greatly improved, and there's also been a lot more open access to free movement. And because of that, many women have left. They've lived abroad, they've maybe stayed abroad, or they've lived for a long time and then came back. And from what people have told me, it's more common for Estonian women, if they go abroad, to meet a foreign guy that way. It's actually not as common for the guy to already be living here and then to meet them. And when you consider how many of them do live abroad at certain points, they've studied or work, it's likely that those would be the ones that would have a foreign husband. And the men that I know of who are married to Estonian women, they all met their wives living abroad. They are living in their home countries or in a different country. They were not living in Estonia. And this is clearly demonstrates this point here. It's the same in many places, especially smaller countries, that the women that stay around will often just prefer their own men, especially real small countries like this with very homogenous cultures. Usually women that want something different, they'll leave. They'll study and work abroad and sometimes stay permanently. The ones that remain often do prefer something about their own home to remain there long term. And the final reason that Estonian women prefer staying with their own is because they want to retain their Estonian culture and identity. They're proud of this in their life, and they value it, and they want to have future generations that also possess these qualities and traits. This is the probably biggest reason why they just stay with their own. And many Estonian women, they won't say this to people if they ask or inquire about this. It won't be this, but if you live here long enough, you start realizing that. And it's also very demonstrated when we look at their history with the Russians and other groups, that they really didn't want these groups like Russians to be occupying them and to kind of be their overlord, so to speak. They wanted to be very independent and have their own identity, and this is clearly seen here. This has been my experiences while living here, and I look forward to your feedback, so thank you.